Hello everyone, my name is Sean Donaldson, and today the title of my presentation is Protecting Our Democracy, Understanding the Importance of Cybersecurity in Elections. Today we will explore the critical role of cybersecurity in ensuring free, fair, and transparent elections. Additionally, we will discuss the various threats facing election infrastructure and the steps that can be taken to mitigate these risks. So a little bit about myself. I'm studying computer science at Ball State University. I'm a senior, and I also have concentrations in cybersecurity and data analytics. And I actually have multiple work experiences in the field of elections, both working with the voting system technical oversight program, which I'll talk a little bit about more later. And I've worked as a Vanderburgh County poll worker, which is in Evansville, Indiana, for those of you who don't know, working during the 2020 primary elections. So I first want to define why this issue matters, why the issue of cybersecurity specifically matters, and this real quick clip shows it really well.
Are you connected to the speaker?
I thought I was.
I think the speaker might be. Is it Bluetooth?
It's okay. It's okay. I'll.
CSSCD at work.
Do you want to blast your laptop speakers?
Yeah.
Okay. Just change the audio output.
You know, it's okay. We don't need the video.
We can just hit escape. Audio down here. And then the audio, not the airplane mode. There we are. Speaker. And then just blast it out your laptop.
There we go.
Cybersecurity today is essentially a continuation of three different activities that are quite old. Intelligence collection, sabotage, and finally subversion, to subvert the authority of political leaders of an election, for example. What we saw in 2016 is really this subversive element through a disinformation campaign has risen to a level of prominence that it last had in the 1980s. The success of disinformation campaigns, of this kind of political subversion, is to drive wedges. Now, the US election campaign in 2016 was a very permissive environment. There were already cracks in the political landscape in the US. So the Russians, in this case, could very easily drive wedges into these cracks and make them even larger. Right now, the concern is that not just Russian operators will assess the 2016 operation as success, but that others consider it a success as well and may join in with a similar methodology and a similar mindset. If that happens, then of course we see a much more difficult environment with disinformation campaigns. That is a very problematic future scenario. The academic field of cybersecurity overlaps with law enforcement and it overlaps with intelligence. This means that often it falls to academic experts to articulate some of the bigger, politically often contentious conclusions.
So here, as it was shown, this references the 2016 election a lot, which is very much there. While it is not a lot of definitive conclusions have been made, it is known that our election cycle, the process as a whole, was altered in some way by cybersecurity infiltrations. And additionally, building off this, why cybersecurity matters is that in an NPR poll after the 2020 election, it was found that 64% of Americans thought that democracy is in crisis and at the risk of failing. And this is really serious because because democracy and free and fair elections is really the way of life that we know, and it is essential to our country and to the world, really. And cybersecurity comes in by reinsuring this trust, that by upping our commitment to cybersecurity, we up the belief in our elections being free and fair. And this is a graph kind of on the flip side. It talks about this was taken in 2019. 1,500 Americans were surveyed about their confidence in cybersecurity in the upcoming 2020 election. A staggering 49% of people did not believe that the U.S. could defend against foreign government interference, which is remarkable because we have nearly half the country who doesn't have a level of trust in our election integrity, and this is something which very much needs to be restored. So today we're going to talk about the election process, the threat landscape, things which are very prevalent in the world of election cybersecurity, the key players and initiatives, best practices taken to secure election equipment, and collaboration and why it's so important in the election field. So the election life cycle. First and foremost, I want to define this because I would say about half the room has only voted maybe once or twice, that that this is very much something that a lot.
Here in high school.
Yeah.
The other half only voted once or twice.
So first, this is from the Election Assistance Commission, the EAC, their official pamphlet on election best practices throughout the whole cycle. So the first steps here really talk about the physical security measures taken in terms of securing our voting machines so they will not be tampered with. A few key ones I want to point out here is keeping in a location with restricted access. So the chain of custody is something which is very important in election integrity, making sure that basically you should be able to know every time someone touched a voting machine to help ensure not only that it's been safe, but if there is an issue, you can go back and look at it. And another important thing I wanted to point out is never connecting it to an internet or other external network. This is actually something very interesting because that alone eliminates a lot of hacking in the modern sense, and that it is actually illegal in Indiana, bound by law, and many other states in some form or another. Some states you just cannot connect it. Some states it is illegal for it to have the ability to connect. This is a very little known thing, which I feel like is very important to highlight as a security measure. Next, the voting equipment programming. So this is not two 80-year-old county clerks opening up VS Code and writing our elections. There's often two flash drives, disks, storage devices of any type, which essentially act as the bootstrap program, which is the programs which first run when you boot up a computer. These programs help essentially set the ballot, like determine based on the county you're voting in who all is on the ballot. And that this is another safety step because it prevents people from just voting on everything. That it's measures like these which are not like thought about cybersecurity that you might just go, well, duh, that are actually really important to the voting process. And testing. The voting machines undergo rigorous testing to make sure that they function as intended and are hard to be tampered with, verifying that the correct election is loaded, ballots are properly read, tabulating results matches the expected outcome. to make sure that the voter has the smoothest process possible and that the process remains intact. So, now that we've covered all the pre-election security measures, this is what 100 million Americans, and I'm sure everyone in this room, has definitely seen it as part of voting. So we have the voter registration, which actually is another form of security, basically compiling a list of who is eligible to vote and where. That's another one of those, you might not think of it, but is really essential elements of security. And then cast your ballot is tallied, and results are submitted to a centralized unit via email, fax, or electronically, and then the election results are tabulated and winners are announced. Now, after the vote, we just took a lot of steps to ensure that the vote was secure. But after the vote, we want to check again because I don't know if anyone's familiar with the old adage, check twice, cut once, that we want to make sure that our voting machines produce the correct intended result. They go through a rigorous audit process, which is actually open to the public, that any one of you could have access to a voting machine audit.
At that point, they're not hand counting paper, are they?
No, so this part is a little more technical, that there are it's kind of like a compilation of ballots, in that it's hard to explain without an example. I should have had one, but it's kind of like a compilation of ballots, and it checks the whole total. That it's kind of like you're picking like a sample, and then you verify based on that sample that you don't check every single voting machine afterwards. So secure storage, and I don't know if you remember this, but at the beginning I talked about secure storage, that this is where the election cycle forms kind of an Ouroboros, where the end loops back into the beginning, where we make sure that voting machines under lock and key, everyone who has access logs when they access something, and cameras to deter any unauthorized access, and just another measure of verifying who has accessed the voting machines. So I wanted to open this part up, and I was wondering what you all think is the most prevalent threat in election cybersecurity.
At this point, Ty, I think, because he's got a USB that could vote 100 times.
Disinformation.
Yeah, no, I think that makes the most sense. You look at all the physical controls, whether it's bipartisan or not, it's a lot of physical locks, chains, and tamper seals to get through.
Yeah.
But misinformation, that's outside the poll place, that's outside the scope of this document.
Absolutely. And so this was a poll done by PBS before the 2020 election, and it was widely believed misleading information that is the public perception of what is the biggest problem, and that is actually proven to be a survey. This is a survey of election officials. Misinformation is the most encountered problem, and so the three types of threats I'm going to talk about today are disinformation, misinformation, hacking, and lack of resources, and how that can impact elections. So, misinformation, it is a term which it has taken on a wild meaning and lost focus almost, but the definition is false or inaccurate information, especially information which is deliberately intended to deceive. And I wanted to point out this graph here. It shows that misinformation, I was surprised by the 11%, that in the modern technology age, misinformation has become more and more sophisticated almost, that it's harder to spot, that that statistic was really interesting to me, as was this chart on the right, where we have a near even split of perception from the general public of who is most at fault for spreading disinformation. And I thought that was really interesting because it just always seemed like something to me to be one source, but
well, maybe it's a difference between a source and spreading. I mean, I think once you say spreading, you don't know where it started, but it spreads. Or, you know, it might start from one source, but spread from multiple sources.
Yeah. Okay. And so I'm going to talk about a misinformation. This is a real life event which happened in the Chicago area during the 2020 election. Facebook ads targeted Latino and Asian American voters, describing Joe Biden as a communist. And additionally, in Chicago, it claimed a Black Lives Matter co-founder practiced witchcraft. That this is a real life example which happened very recently of misinformation being spread to negatively impact elections. And it negatively impacts elections by eroding public confidence in the democratic process, and additionally to suppress voter turnout. And I'm not going to get into it completely, but and the consequences are of this misinformation not only being used but being believed. It leads it to very overwhelmed voters to distort like their whole reality just by seeing one falsehood. And it also propagates lies about election workers, which has a very significant process in eroding trust in our elections. And this is another graph I wanted to show about how just serious misinformation is, that nearly 60% of Americans thought it was very hard to tell what is legitimate and what is misleading. That, like I referenced earlier, in the modern era with the current technology, we have so many resources that as referenced in this Sony scandal, it is so easy to fall for something which looks legitimate. And hacking. So this is another one. While I mentioned earlier that in a lot of places voting machines legally cannot be connected to the internet, there are still some forms of hacking which impact our elections. For example, in Pennsylvania, malicious emails targeted county election workers around May 17th in 2022, reaching nearly 10,000 attempted schemes. The point of these elections was to try to get poll workers to log into government websites using their valid credentials so they could be stolen. And while that it really shows that while tampering with the voting machine itself might be difficult, interfering with the election process via hacking is still very much possible, and something that education of poll workers and anyone in the election process needs to be very well done. And I'm going to show a quick video about a actual election hack which happened in our state.
U.S. sources say the Russian military intelligence hackers known as Fancy Bear that targeted the Clinton campaign in 2016 are at it again, this time targeting Democratic State Party email accounts in California and Indiana, and U.S. think tanks. At Homeland Security's Cybersecurity Election Command Center in Virginia, analysts coordinate with the FBI, the military, and 8,800 election officials nationwide.
I'm concerned about everything. I'm a bit paranoid, and so until this thing gets put to bed, hair on my neck standing up.
Last week, the DHS unit said a Russian state-sponsored attacker had conducted a campaign against a wide variety of U.S. targets, stealing data from at least 2 servers, though the FBI says it has no evidence to date that integrity of elections data has been compromised. Cyber intrusion detection sensors now sit on every state election network looking for hackers.
So we're looking for any kind of tremor in the force, as it were.
Because the U.S. election systems are so dispersed, cyber pros believe it's unlikely a single attack would be successful. But if hackers alter just a handful of voter party affiliations, it could undermine public confidence in the vote. The good news? More than 92% of the country's ballots will have paper backups.
If there's any question about the accuracy of the vote count, as a nation we have now paper records and the ability to roll back the tape.
The biggest hack threat continues to be that an election worker somewhere will open a suspicious email and click on a bad link, letting hackers in.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for...
U.S. sources say they're...
Alrighty, yeah. That, I really like that video because A, it gives the instance of a very real threat which happened in our state, and B, it really expands the scope of the election system, that the hackers were trying to get into political affiliated party servers, not during election day, not during election season even, really, and but it still affects the election process. That it really shows how broad a scope election cybersecurity needs to be. And really quickly, I want to talk about the lack of resources. So lack of resources is a very prevalent thing in elections. That today, especially more than anything, just general lack of man hours. That security can be a hard thing because people are stretched so thin, because poll workers are not signing up like they used to because of a number of reasons. During the pandemic, a lot of older retiree poll workers didn't sign up due to health concerns. And following the 2020 election, it was found to be very hard to recruit poll workers for the 2022 midterms due to threats of violence. That the lack of physical people working at the polls makes it easier for security to be breached and impact our election cycle. So I've talked a lot about problems, but now I'm going to get to the solutions. Collaboration. This is really the biggest thing which the cybersecurity community as a whole can do to improve our election cybersecurity. So I've shown videos where talking about Russian hackers and Chinese hackers, and there's daily threats who try to come in from places we don't even know where they are located from. And that we have all these people working not together but against us, that the best solution is collaboration by a great number of people working towards secure elections. And I'm gonna need to skip best practices. So really quickly, the Help America Vote Act, it was signed into law in 2002 by President Bush following the 2000 election, where there was total recounts everywhere. It was generally at the time the most chaotic election in modern American history. And essentially what this bill did, it set up structure to improve the integrity of our elections and election infrastructure as a whole, to make it more collaborative and in general just larger. So we have four key players. The Election Assistance Commission, or the EAC, which supports state and local election officials in their efforts to ensure accessible and accurate elections. The EAC develops guidance according to the Help America Vote Act in Congress making guidelines, training, providing resources to foster a culture of sharing and collaboration, working together towards the goal of secure elections. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is the lead federal agency responsible for election security. CISA works closely with federal departments and agencies, state and local government, election officials, and other valued partners to manage risks to election infrastructure. The Elections Infrastructure ISAC, it is a collaborative community of election officials. It essentially is kind of in some ways a big group chat of election officials where election officials are able to share attacks they've faced, solutions to attacks they've faced, training and resources. And the Voting System Technical Oversight Program, or VSTOP, this one is specific to Indiana and is where I interned for a year. It was established in 2007 at Ball State University under funding from the Help America Vote Act. And it advises the Indiana Secretary of State and the Indiana Election Commission on the certification of voting machines and electronic poll books in Indiana. The VSTOP team manages the physical security and cybersecurity of election systems, conducts post-election audits, and develops and provides maintenance for a statewide election systems inventory database. And I'm running a little long, so
the nation's top federal election infrastructure agency says this year's election was, quote, the most secure in history. In a statement, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency said, quote, there is no evidence any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised. The statement goes on to read, quote, we can assure you we have the utmost confidence in the security and integrity of our elections, and you should too. Meanwhile, CBS News is...
Yeah, so today I talked about the threat landscape, what is faced in the modern era in terms of threats to impact the whole election system, not just the voting day. Just a bit about the key players who help improve election integrity. And I've talked about why collaboration is important, and that I hope a takeaway is that yes, there are many threats to elections today, and that while there are a lot of threats, there are a great many people who now are working more unified than ever to help ensure our election integrity and improve our country. Thank you.